Hey, today is Saturday, May the 2nd. It's Saturday, and it's a beautiful day. It's sunny, it's warm, and you know what, child of God? There's no rain in the forecast, and so get outside. Get that sun on your face, go on a walk, enjoy the day that God has made for us. Today I want to talk to you about who is your biggest critic. Who holds the highest standards for you? Because I'm convinced most of us, our biggest critic is ourselves. Our standards that we have set for ourselves are higher than our bosses may set for ourselves, and our colleagues may set for ourselves, and our community may set for ourselves. When we go about our lives and our day-to-day, we have set this expectations for what we expect to come from our day-to-day lives. And so the expectations and the standards that we had set for ourselves, truth be told, these last 6 weeks, boy, those have really been tested, haven't they? In particular, teachers have really gone through this the last 6 weeks, that you all have been asked to educate students in the classrooms. And you've been trained and you've been equipped and you've been used to being able to connect with students on a one-to-one basis. And now for the last 6 weeks, you've been asked to continue to connect, to continue to teach, but now you're being asked to do it in a way that you've never done before. That you're sending these lesson plans, over the internet and sending videos trying to connect with your students. And truth be told, I'm not sure about yourself, but I've been doing a lot of these things as a pastor, and my expectations of ministry, we've had to make it up as we go. I mean, a lot of what we've been doing, we could not have planned for it. And so we're doing the best that we can. And I'm convinced that we are harsher critics of ourselves than anybody else that surround us. And we have expectations, and we want things to continue to go the way that they are. And teachers, you want your students to continue and to grow in knowledge. And frankly, if we need to be okay with giving ourselves some grace and giving ourselves some forgiveness. That what we've gone through, incredibly difficult times, and if you're students and your business and what we're doing as a church, and if we haven't been abiding by the same standards that we've set for ourselves, give yourself some grace. Give yourself some forgiveness. Know that, my work and what I've been doing, it hasn't been up to my own standards, my own stuff, but you know what? That's okay, because I'm doing the best I can, and I give myself some grace in this moment. And it reminds me of this encounter that Jesus has with Peter. And I'm convinced that Peter has set some standards upon his own life, upon his own ministry, that exceed even those of Jesus. You recall when Peter makes this bold claim, that Peter tells Jesus that he would never deny him, that wherever Jesus goes, Peter says, I'll be right by your side. And Peter says, Jesus, even if you're arrested, even if you're killed, I'll be there. And yet we know what happens to Peter. When Jesus is arrested, the fear, the moment that he's in it's too much, and Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And I can only imagine the type of guilt, the type of burden, the type of the type of soul searching that Peter must have gone through, knowing that he let Jesus down as he returns to the upper room, and he lives with knowing that he had failed his own expectations, that he had failed to live up to the standards that he had for himself. And yet Jesus, when he returns and he shows himself to disciples, and there's this other account that Jesus in particular speaks to Peter. And I'm convinced that Peter has this guilt, has this burden upon his life, that Jesus understands that somehow, some way, Jesus needs to lift this, and somehow Peter needs to forgive himself in order to move on. So the passage I want to read for you today, it comes to us from John 21, verse 15. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He's speaking about the other disciples. "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know that I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." I've always wondered, and I wish I knew the type of tone that Jesus was speaking to Peter in this moment, because I'm convinced that Jesus is looking at his friend, he's looking at his disciple, and there is an immense amount of compassion and concern that Jesus is feeling for Peter in this moment, because Jesus knows that Peter's been living with this guilt. He's been living with this burden, that Peter has been living with this knowledge that Peter's expectation of who he was and his courage and what Peter thought he was going to be able to do did not come to fruition. And so Peter's filling with this, is living with this weight upon his life. And Jesus is trying to help Peter lift that burden, to lift that just disappointment that Peter's been feeling. And Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" And every time Peter says, "Yes, yes, yes." And Jesus simply responds, "Then go out and do what you've been called to do. Feed my sheep," meaning, care for the people in this world. Spread the gospel, spread the good news. Do what you've been made to do. And so, child of God, today, give yourself that grace. Give yourself, the relief of knowing that these last 6 weeks, they haven't been perfect. And I'm sure you've made mistakes along the way. We all have. Give yourself grace, give yourself forgiveness, because Jesus tells you, "I love you." And the weeks ahead, they're not going to be simple. You're going to make mistakes along the way. And yet, your biggest critic is yourself. But you forgive yourself. Give yourself grace. We continue on making up some ways as we go. And yet we go knowing that God loves us, that Jesus forgives us, and that Jesus tells us, "I love you, I love you, I love you."